business. So now that doesn't always happen if you start giving to the church. That doesn't mean that you're going to get your own reality TV show. But we do know that God works in mysterious ways, and God is always looking for ways to bless us when we put God first. I've got a scripture in Proverbs I want to share with you. It's Proverbs 3, verses 9 through 10. It says, honor the Lord with your wealth and with the best part of everything that you produce. And then God is going to fill up your house. He's going to give you more than enough, and your vats will overflow with good wine. We all want the overflow in our life. We all want the increase to come. And God has shown us in the Bible a great way for him to be able to allow finances and increase to come into your life is when we put God first in our finances. And we start giving consistently give a percentage of our income, and we give it to the church and we give it to God. Watch and see what God does for you. Maybe you're like Nikki and you've never gave to the church before. We encourage you to try it today, or at least start this month. There's 2 ways that you can give. On the screen, it says right there, you can text giving,
Video. You like the video, right? You can give it up for the video team. You guys are awesome. I don't know about you. I feel like an epic human when that music is playing and I walk on stage. I'm like, I could do anything. And so today I get to speak. So that's my anything. I'm excited to share today. My name is Gabriel. My wife and I, Gabby, who's down at South Campus today, we are the youth and young adult pastors in the church. And so we pay the young people to yell for us. And I'm excited to share today. If you're in Anchor, just a shameless plug while I have the mic. On Friday, so if you're between the ages of 18 and 30, on Friday we have an event here, 7 o'clock. It's going to be on the back lot. It's going to be really powerful. I want to give a special shout out to everybody that's watching online this service. We're excited to have you here. And we're going to get into right away the Heroes series. And I'm going to jump into Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 1. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. It says this, and you can follow along on if you download the City Church app, there's notes there, and if you want to follow along, then you can see all of my notes today. Take notes on there. You can use a piece of paper and a pen if you know what that is still, but you can also follow along on the app, and I think the instructions are on the screen. But let me jump in. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 says this, therefore, everybody say therefore. Since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. And let us run with endurance the race that God has set before us. In this series, and I think we're on about week 4 of the Heroes series, we're studying some of the famous people of the Old Testament, some of the patriarchs and matriarchs of the Old Testament, and we're learning from their life how we can live our life a little bit better. Does anybody like to learn from your mistakes, so you don't just keep making the mistakes over and over again? One thing that's better than learning from your mistakes is learning from somebody else's mistakes. And one of the things that we're keying in on and we're getting out of our Bibles are some of the mistakes and some of the life lessons that some of these patriarchs made even thousands of years ago, so that we can live our life a little bit different. Hebrews 12:1 talks about life being a race, and I don't know where you're at in your journey of your race. A couple of years ago, there was a group of us that ran a half marathon, and I know some of you that are really athletic. I just lost all of your respect because I ran half of a marathon. It wasn't the whole thing. But if you saw the territory, then you would know that it was a very hilly, very difficult half marathon. About mile 8, we hit the bottom of this hill, and it was an out and back, so you got out, and then you had to turn around and run back. And so when you ran around the cone, you turned around, and there was just like a mammoth hill. I don't know who did this, but it was like the worst design ever. But we turn around, run up a hill, and about mile 10, mile 11 maybe, I honestly thought that I was going to die. I was like, Jesus, take me now. I thought it was all over. And on the side of the road, I don't know if you know who Izzy and Jess Rodriguez are. They were here first service, but I remember on the side of the road, Jess saw me running. She was there to watch Izzy, and she goes, Gabe, are you okay? And I thought, I think I am. But I got finished with the race, and I looked back, and I got the chance to cheer on some of my teammates that we had done this with. I actually got a new strength and went back and ran a mile with a couple of them just to help them through their race. And I think somehow in Scripture, like it says in Hebrews 12:1, that there is patriarchs, that there are people in heaven that are cheering you on in your race. And this series is as if we're listening in to what they would say to us so that we can learn from some of their mistakes. We can run our race a little better. And today, I want to look at one of these patriarchs, and his name is Jacob. Everybody say Jacob. All right, Jacob. And one of the lessons that you can learn from Jacob, maybe the key lesson that goes through his theme of life that he would speak to us today, and I think it's where some of us are today, is this: when your life isn't turning out the way that you hoped. When your life isn't turning out the way that you hoped. And I don't know where you are today, but I think that some of us are probably living in the moment where we're thinking, why didn't this happen? Why couldn't this happen? Why isn't my marriage looking a little better? My kids looking a little better? Why aren't I looking a little better? Life isn't the way that I want it to be. And Jacob's life today is going to speak to us about when your life isn't turning out the way that you hoped. Now, Jacob is considered a patriarch now, but in the Old Testament and when he was born, he was kind of thought of as one of the black sheeps of his family. Now, his grandfather, his name is Abraham. And Abraham, if you know the Bible, you've been around Christianity a little bit, he's one of the most famous people. He's actually called the father of our faith, of our modern day faith. We could trace it all back to Abraham. He was a great man in the Bible. His son Isaac was his promised son, where Abraham had such huge faith that at 100 years old, he had a baby, and the baby was Isaac, and it was given by God. Isaac was given to him by God, and he was the promised son. And so we see Abraham, we see Isaac, and then Isaac's son is Jacob. And Jacob was the son. He was actually a twin when he was born, and him and his brother Esau were born to Rebekah. And from the very beginning, Jacob's life was filled with turmoil. And in Genesis 25, before Jacob was even born, we saw this in Scripture where God spoke to Rebekah and said, "Hey, Rebekah, I want to tell you something about the two boys that are in your womb right now." And God says to Rebekah this: "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." Now, when Jacob and Esau were born, Esau came out first, and so he was the firstborn son. But Jacob, he was thought of as, he was a manipulator, that he was a conniver his whole life. He was the black sheep of the family. Literally, when Esau was born, Jacob reached out of his mom's womb. Now, don't picture this. Okay, Jacob reached out, grabs Esau's foot as if to pull him back into the womb so that Jacob could be the firstborn. Because in the Old Testament, if you were the firstborn, you would get more of an inheritance. You would get 2/3 of the inheritance. They'd split up the rest between all the other kids. And so Jacob, from the very beginning as a baby, was a deceiver and was a manipulator. And so when he was born, his mom, Rebekah, actually named him the deceiver. Named him the manipulator. Literally, Jacob means the deceiver, the manipulator, the trickster, the coward, the liar. Now, it's all right. Thanks, Mom, right? Can you imagine if I don't know if you have a twin, but if they looked at the firstborn twin and they said, "This is the good-looking one. This is the child that looks good and is photogenic in every picture, so we will call you beautiful." And then they looked at the other baby, they looked at you, and they're like, "And we will call you ugly manipulator." That is Jacob from the beginning. He's called deceiver, manipulator, trickster, coward, con artist. But the reality is that Jacob lived up to his name. He lived up to that meaning. He lived up to that for decades. And where we're going to go to in Scripture in Genesis 32 is when he kind of gets to the end of that rope. But just to show you how deceptive he was, one of the things that he stole from his brother Esau was his brother's birthright. And in the Old Testament, the birthright is so meaningful. And literally, when their dad, Isaac, was on his deathbed, he's in the hospital, on his deathbed, about to die, and he says, "I want to call in Esau to come in, my firstborn son, and I want to pray for him a final blessing. I want to pray for him a final prayer. I want to tell him how much I love him." Esau was out hunting, and Jacob went in and pretended like he was Esau and stole his brother's final prayer. He stole his brother's final blessing. That's how deceptive and how manipulative he was. And so that's the life of Jacob. Jacob, after he did that, Esau, his brother, wanted to kill him, and so he ran from his brother Esau, and he found himself out in the wilderness, and he ended up finding two wives. He married a woman named Rachel. He married a woman named Leah, and he had a bunch of babies. And while he's out there, he ended up kind of manipulating and conniving his way into taking a lot of the livestock from his father-in-law, Laban, his father. Because of the law, he stole from him, and in the middle of the night, one night, he runs from his father-in-law with his father-in-law's two daughters, all of the grandkids, 11 sons and one daughter, 12 grandkids, running out into the wilderness from Laban, stealing a bunch of stuff and going on his way. And that is the manipulator. That is the deceiver. When Laban catches up to him, this is what he says to him. The first thing he says, "Why have you deceived me?" And I can tell you why Jacob had deceived him, because Jacob was a deceiver. He was a manipulator. He was a con artist. He was somebody who would use somebody else to benefit himself his entire life. That is what he has done. So Laban catches up to him. They kind of make an amends, but we find Jacob in Genesis 32 kind of caught in a sandwich between the situations, in a sandwich that he had created, where his present was coming from behind him in Laban and saying, "Why are you the deceiver?" And looking in front of him as he's running from Laban, he's running into the land of Esau, who said he was going to kill him. So in front of him, he sees his mistakes of his past, and behind him, he sees the mistakes of his present. And here we find Jacob. So Jacob sends all of his family, he sends all of his livestock, all of his possessions into the land of Esau, and we find him sending them all ahead, and he's sitting by himself in this camp crying out to God and saying, God, can you help me? Can you change something? Can you shift something? Could my life look any better because it's not looking the way that I thought it would? And we see in Genesis chapter 32, 24 to 25, we come to this point with Jacob. It says, this left Jacob all alone in the camp, and a man came and wrestled with him, or like we say in Nebraska, wrestled with him until the dawn began to break. When the man saw that he would not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip and wrenched it out of socket. Now, because of the poetic language of the Old Testament and the way that this was written, when we see that Jacob is wrestling with a man, it's important to catch this. He's not just wrestling with any man. Literally, if you study out the words and you study out the language, Jacob is wrestling with God himself, maybe even Jesus as a Christophany showing up in the Old Testament in the flesh, or he's wrestling with an angel. Now, I like to think that it's God himself, and you see that later. Why? Because he says that he wrestled with God, but it's at least an angel. This is Jacob sitting out in the wilderness, kind of tired of his life the way that it is, and he's wrestling with God. And you might think, well, how can that relate to me today? Because if you go home today and you're wrestling with God, and maybe your life is not looking good, or your marriage isn't looking good, or your kids, the situation is just tough or difficult. Maybe your school situation isn't looking right. Maybe you're having a hard time, and you say, you know what, I'm going to go and I'm just going to talk to God. But how do I wrestle with God? If Jesus shows up in the room, call me, because I'm going to come hang out with you. But if he doesn't, it's important to know that you can wrestle with God, and we wrestle today with God, and not to try and beat God, but the wrestling is our will against his will. It's our control against his control, and Jacob finds himself wrestling over who's in control. We can do that in prayer today, and what happens, though? The question is, what happens when you wrestle with God and you surrender to his will? That's where we see Jacob. He's wrestling. He's struggling with life. He's like, this is not the life that I wanted. And he sees all of his mistakes surrounding him, and he decides to wrestle with God over it, saying, okay, you know what, I'm going to stand up to my will. I'm going to stand up for God, and I'm going to set my will before his will. And so he's wrestling with him. What happens when you wrestle with God and you surrender to his will? Three things happen. The first thing that we see in the life of Jacob, and you'll see it in your life, if you pause a moment and you say, I'm not happy with my life and I want to wrestle with God, I'm going to pray with him about it. What happens when you do this? The first thing is that God gives you strength. He gives you strength. Everybody say strength. Look to a guy around you and just tell him you look pretty strong. You look pretty strong. A young adult somewhere just felt the presence of God for the first time. He gives you strength. Jacob had wrestled all night. Literally, the sun goes down while he's wrestling with God. And the sun comes up when he finishes wrestling with God. God gave him a strength to endure through the journey. The Bible says again in Isaiah chapter 40, it talks about how when you wrestle with God, when you submit your will to his will, it says this, but those who hope in the Lord, those who turn their will over to God's will, that turn their control over to God's control, those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. It says you'll run and not grow weary. You won't be, the worst part of the half marathon that we did is about mile 12. Somebody was taking pictures, like a photographer, but it gets worse. For the last year and a half, at mile 12, they should have taken them on mile 1 where everybody's smiling and they're like, oh, this is so easy and fun and amazing. But it was mile 12, and it looked like a Thriller music video. Everybody was like, and but they keep sending me the pictures, and I keep seeing the pictures of me at mile 12, and they're like, do you want to buy this? I'm like, of course I don't want to buy this. Stop sending it to me. But God says that there is a moment in your journey where you might feel that way, that you might feel like you're out of energy, and you might be there today, that you're out of energy, and you're like, I don't have any strength left. And God says that just come to me all who are weary and heavy laden, is what the Bible says, and I will give you rest. That if you take my yoke upon you, then I'm going to come to you, and I'm going to make it easier for you. I'm going to give you strength. I'm going to give you joy. I'm going to give you peace. He says he will give you strength. He will give you strength. The first thing that we learn from Jacob when he wrestles with God is that God will give you strength. The second thing that we see is that he restores your identity. He restores your identity. Everybody look at somebody and say, you look good? He restores your identity. Genesis chapter 32, verses 27 to 28 says this, and this is Jacob fighting with God, maybe even Jesus himself. And the man says to Jacob, what is your name? The man asked. He replied, Jacob. Your name will no longer be Jacob, he says. The man told him, from now on you will be called Israel, that you will be called the Prince of God. You will no longer be called the deceiver, the manipulator. You will be called Israel because you have fought with God and you have fought with men, that you have fought with the expectations of men, that you have fought with the things that maybe your parents have said to you or you've even said to yourself, or the things that are important, that you have fought with that and you have won. So I'm changing your name from Jacob to Israel. Now, in the Old Testament, a name means way more than maybe what you might think of it now. It's way more than just, oh, Gabe and Gabby, that's cute, they have the same name. No, it is connected to your identity. In the Old Testament, when you see the name of Jacob, when you see him as the deceiver, the manipulator, that is who he was. And he lived that way for decades because it was his identity. But he comes to this moment where he's tired and he's sandwiched in the middle of his own faults. He's in the middle of his own difficulties. And he's crying out to God. And God comes down in a moment and he says, who are you? And Jacob doesn't lie about who he was. When he says his name, when he says, I am Jacob, he's not just saying, I am Gabe, or I am Julia, or I am Carl, or I am whoever, fill in the blank. He's not just saying, this is who I am. He's saying, I am Jacob. And he's owning up to the fact that he is the manipulator, that he is the deceiver. This is who I am. I am the trickster. I am the coward. I am the liar. I am the con artist. I am all of these things. And he owns up to God in that moment. And he says, this is who I am. I have faults. And God says in that moment, he touches him and he restores his identity. He says, I call you Israel. Now, some of us think that it just means that God's going to make something new out of you. But God doesn't just make something new out of them in that moment, him in that moment. He restores him back to the original identity. I don't know if you guys, anybody like Christmas? Anybody seen like the Christmas trees already, like in Home Depot and all of the, like Walmart, and there's Christmas decorations. Some of us are like, ugh. Some of us are like, woo. Okay. Either way, one thing I like about Christmas is when you ask for a Christmas gift, you're not asking for the knockoff. You know, does anybody ask for that? Like, you're like, I would just love some Nikes that are not real Nikes. So, like, the first time I tie the shoelace, it like rips the shoe apart. Anybody asking for like an iPad for Christmas or like an iPhone-y, you know, knockoff Nikes? Nobody wants that. When you ask for the original. You ask for the real thing. What Jesus does in this moment and what he'll do in your life when you reach out to him is that he will touch your life and he will restore you back to what he originally intended for you. Psalm 139 talks about this. It says that every person that is born, that God would come, and he says that he forms you and he fashions you. He numbers all your days. He creates you for a purpose and a destiny before you are ever a thought in your parents' mind. And he also creates you and he forms and fashions you with a plan and a purpose before you ever have the chance to screw it up. And he knows that you're going to do it. And I've been there too, where you feel like you've given your destiny away, or you've traded your inheritance for pleasures, that you've given it away, and God says, no, that I'm going to take you back to the original. Jeremiah 1:5, another great prophet in the Old Testament, says this, before I formed you, he's saying to Jeremiah, God is saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart, and I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Before you ever have a chance to screw it up, God has a plan for you. And when you wrestle with him and you connect with him, he's going to restore you back to where he originally intended you to be all along. So the first thing that we see is that God comes and he gives you strength. when you wrestle with him. When you go to him and you say in prayer, like, I just need you, a prayer like David would pray. And in David's prayers, he's like, God, everything is terrible. Everything's falling apart. Can you help me? Can you do something? When you go to him and you cry out to him, he will give you strength and he will restore your identity. The third thing that he does is he blesses you. The third thing he does is he blesses you. We see that in the story of Jacob in Genesis 32:29. It says, please tell me your name, Jacob says. Please tell me your name. And Jacob flips the script here on God, because God had said, what's your name? And Jacob said, I am Jacob, the trickster, the liar, the manipulator. The name is connected to who you are. It's connected to your identity. And Jacob flips it and he says, who are you? Who is this man that I've been wrestling with? Please tell me your name, Jacob said. Well, why do you want to know my name? The man replied. Then he blessed Jacob there. And what the man does and what God will do in your life when you wrestle with him, when you go to him and you say, life is tough and it's difficult and I want to submit my will to your will, what he will do is he will bless you. And I'm not just talking about a natural blessing. You know, I've been praying for like 15 years, or not 15 years. I could be praying for the next 15 years. I've been praying for a while that I'm just going to wake up one day and there's like a Tesla in my driveway, the Model X, you know, and I'll keep praying. Maybe I will be praying for 15 years that it'll happen. By the time I get it, you have to keep it plugged in and drive around the block with an extension cord. I don't know. But that's not the type of blessing that he's talking about here. Jacob had already sent all of his possessions. He sent his 2 wives, all of his kids, everything he owned ahead of him. And in this moment, wrestling with God, God says that I'm going to bless you. Please tell me your name. And God doesn't just tell us who he is in our lives. He wants to show us. Romans chapter 5, verse 8 says that God demonstrates his love for us, and while we were still sinners, while we were in the middle of our bad decisions, while we were making poor choices, God says, I'm going to demonstrate my love for you in this moment. While you're a sinner, I died for you. God doesn't just come and tell you who he is, he demonstrates who he is. And so point 3 is that he blesses you. He blesses you. It's a deep soul satisfaction. When he goes to Jacob, he's not saying, I'm just going to give you more animals, or I'm going to give you more crops, I'm going to give you more land, I'm going to give you more children. He says, I'm going to give you a deep soul satisfaction. So whatever the world throws at you, that you're going to be able to sustain your happiness, that you're going to be able to sustain your joy. If you look at that word bless, it doesn't mean just happiness, because when you look up the definition of happiness, it says that when your circumstances look a certain way, then you're happy. So if you get the things that you're asking for, it'll make you happy. If you don't get the things that you're asking for, then you're not happy. What this word is it's joy. It's deep soul satisfaction. That is what God will do for you. And I remember the moment where I was broken. I was driving south on the 15, and I remember there were just so many things in life and so many mistakes that I had made, and I felt like the devil had just been telling me, Gabe, you're a loser. Gabe, God can't use you. You've made too many mistakes, that there's no way that you can move past this. You're never going to be a pastor. You're never going to be a leader. You're never going to do anything worthwhile. This is what the devil is speaking to me. And I remember I'm wrestling over it with God, going south on the 15, and I was like crying so hard in my car. Jesus wept, so it's cool. But I'm sitting there crying in the car, and I couldn't hardly drive, so I'm going like 15 miles an hour in the slow lane on the freeway. And I look over next to me, there's a guy giving me half a peace sign, and he's like, okay, it's all great. Some of you will catch that later. But it was just this moment, and I'm like wrestling with God. And he says, Gabe, do you think that I could love you? And I thought, no, I thought, yeah, of course. Why would you ask me that, God? Like, of course you can love me. And he goes, no, Gabe, do you think that I could love you? And I said, yeah, God, of course, you are love. It says it in the Bible. I'm an intern, at the time. I was like, of course it says that you love me. And he goes, no, Gabe, do you think that I could love you? And I'm just like crying in the car, going 15 miles an hour, just having this moment, wrestling with God, wrestling over my purpose, wrestling over my identity. And I said, God, I don't think that you could love me. And he says, Gabe, I love you anyway. It doesn't matter what you feel. It doesn't matter what you think. I love you anyways, and I'm going to demonstrate it to you because that's how God is. And he wants to give you a deep soul satisfaction. Whatever life would throw at you, that you would feel the depths of his love in a way that would be unshakable. Those are the three things that God does. When you wrestle with him, he'll give you a new strength. He will renew and restore your identity back to what he originally intended, and he will bless you. That's what happens when you wrestle with God. That's what happened when Jacob wrestled with God. And I think that the interesting thing about Hebrews chapter 12 is as if God opens up the windows of heaven and he allows some of those patriarchs to speak to us some of the things that they would speak in life. What would they say to us? What would Jacob say to us if he was here today? If he walked into the room, what would he tell us? Three things I feel like Jacob would say to us to encourage us today. The first one is don't give up. Don't give up. Look at somebody, say, don't give up. I believe Jacob walked into the room today because he lived a life that was unworthy before God in our eyes. And he comes to this point where he's fed up with it. And I believe that that Jacob would say to us today, if he walked in the room, he would say, just wrestle with God. Just wrestle with him until you can rest in him. Just wrestle with God until you find rest in him. I know that it's difficult. I know that the journey of your life is not easy. I know you hit the hills and somebody takes a picture and he sends it to you and you're reminded of it, how bad life and how difficult life can be at times. I know that, but don't give up. Wherever you are, just wrestle with God until you can rest in God. Jeremiah 29:13 is one of my favorite scriptures in the entire Bible. It says that when you go looking for God, it says that you find him. This is talking about God himself. When you come looking for me, you'll find me. Yes, when you get serious about finding me and you want it more than anything else, I'll make sure that you won't be disappointed. God is not a God of disappointment. And if you go seeking for him, you will not find religion. You will not find duty. You will not find a list of tasks that you have to do and that you don't do for him to love you. He says that if you come looking for him, you are going to find him. And Jacob, I think, would come today and he would say, don't give up. Wherever you are in life, don't give up. Don't give up on what you've been struggling for or striving for, because if you keep looking and you come looking for me, you're going to find me. That God would say that you would find him. So the first thing is don't give up. Second thing that I think Jacob would say to us today is let God lead. Let God lead. Let God lead. Wherever you are in life, I know that there's some of us here that we've been trying to figure it out in our own strength, in our own effort for a really long time. And I could see it on some of your faces, and I've seen it on my face in the mirror, that you're tired. The amazing thing about letting God lead, or letting anybody lead, if you're driving somewhere and there's somebody ahead of you and you're just following their car, you don't have to figure out all of the turns and how to get from point A to point B. You don't have to figure out every U-turn that you have to make. You don't have to figure out if you're in a new place, you don't have to know the map and you don't need to know where anything else is except for the leader. And God says, I want you to let me lead. And he's a good leader, and he won't get you lost in life. He's going to get you from point A to point B where he intended you to be all along. Mark 8:34 says this. This is Jesus talking. He's calling the crowd to join his disciples, and he said, anyone who intends to come with me has to let me lead. You're not in the driver's seat. I'm in the driver's seat. You're not in the driver's seat. I am, and he will not get you lost. I think Jacob would come here today, and he would say, don't give up. Come on, let God lead. Wherever you are in life today, just give over ownership to Jesus and let him lead. And the third thing that Jacob would say to us today is you are not disqualified. You are not disqualified. It doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter what you've been through. It doesn't matter the difficulty of life that you may have imposed on yourself by bad decision making. Jacob would come today and he would say from God that you are not disqualified. I don't know if you're taking notes on the app, you're taking it on a piece of paper, but I pray that you would get this in your heart, that you would know when you leave here today with a resolve that God would say to you that you are not disqualified. That God wants to use you, and he can use you, and he created you for a purpose that's bigger than anything that you could ever come up with in your own mind. And one of my favorite things about the Old Testament and these patriarchs is that their life is still speaking, and it has spoken through the generations. In Exodus chapter 1, we see hundreds of years after Jacob had passed away, God goes to Moses, who's another patriarch, and he says in Exodus 1:1, it says, "These are the names of the son of Israel." This is the beginning of the book of Exodus. The sons of Israel. These are the sons of the man who was Jacob and is now Israel. I used to think that it was the people of Israel was just tied to a location, but it's not tied to a location. It's tied to a man who had an encounter moment with God and everything shifted. These are the names of the sons of Israel who moved to Egypt with their father, each with his family. And this is the story of what happened over the last 100 years. And we come to a place where the Israelites are held captive. They're held captive by the Egyptians. And God goes to a man named Moses on another hill. And the man named Moses is wrestling with God. He's wrestling with him. And God says, "I want to use you, Moses. I want to use you to go set all of my people, the size of all of San Diego, 3 million people. I want you to go and I want you to set them free. I'm choosing you and I'm appointed you to go do something great as the leader." And Moses looks to God, and he's wrestling with him over this. And he says, "God, you can't use me." In Exodus chapter 3, he's saying, "You can't use me. I'm a stutterer. I can't even talk right." And Moses had killed the man. He was a murderer. He was a stutterer. And he's supposed to go to 3 million people, and he's supposed to set them free and let God use him. And he's going, "No, God, you couldn't use me. You couldn't use me." And God says, "I'm going to tell you who I am. I'm going to tell you who I am, City Church. Come on, I'm going to tell you who I am today. For those of you that feel like you're disqualified and that God couldn't use you, I'm going to tell you who I am." And God spoke to me. I don't know if this is everybody, but I know that it's somebody. I'm driving through Nebraska a couple weeks ago on the way to the airport, and God started to speak to me, and he said, "Go tell City Church about Jacob." And this is what God says. And he goes to Moses, and he says, "To the disqualified, to the murderer, I'm going to tell you who I am. I am the God of Abraham. I am the God of Isaac, and I am the God of Jacob." Why did he say Jacob? I understand why he said Abraham. Abraham was a great man. He's the father of our faith. He's the one that we can look back thousands of years and we can trace our lineage back to him. And God used him, and he called him, and he says, "I'm going to make you a father of many nations." That's who Abraham is. I get Isaac. Isaac's the chosen son. He's the chosen one. He's the miracle from God. When he was supposed to die, God saved him. God used him to endure. Through him, we can trace the lineage of Jesus Christ himself to Isaac. I get that. But why does he say Jacob? Why doesn't he say Israel? Why doesn't he look at him and go, "Moses, I'm going to tell you who I am. I'm the God of Abraham," and you get that. "I'm the God of Isaac." Why doesn't he say the God of Israel? I can tell you why he doesn't say the God of Israel, because there's a lot of Jacobs that are sitting in the room right now. And you might feel like you could never be used by God. And God says to Moses, "I am the God of Abraham. I am the God of Isaac, and I am the God of Jacob." Jacob is the worst part of Israel. Israel is the best part of Jacob. And God goes to Moses and he says, "I can use you because I used Jacob. I used the manipulator. I used the deceiver. I used the liar. I used the con man. If I can use him, then I can use you." And God took Moses and he let him take his people from captivity, out of bondage, and into an abundant life. And we can trace ourselves back to the man named Jacob. And God says, if I can use Jacob and I can use Moses, then I can use every person that's sitting in the City Church today. Come on, give it up for God. He's a good God. I'm sorry if I yelled at you, but I want to pray for you today. And if you could just close your eyes and maybe bow your head wherever you are. And I know that's some of us today. I know it. God, I know that some of us here today are feeling in that place where we are disqualified. That we feel like that God, you couldn't use us. And God, I pray right now, God, for every person, maybe it's one person, maybe it's everybody in the room, but every person that feels like they need to understand, God, that you could use them, that they are not disqualified. God, I pray right now, as they've been wrestling with you, God, that you would renew their strength. God, I pray every person in the room, God, that you would renew their strength. God, I pray they would rise up on wings like eagles. God, I pray a new, fresh infilling of the grace of God. And Lord, I pray a restoration right now. People here that feel like they have dreams and a calling on their life and they've wandered away from it, God, I pray that you would restore them back to the original, the things that you spoke a long time ago, God, back to them. God, I thank you that there is no one disqualified in the room today. And Lord, I pray a refreshing and a fresh wind of grace. And God, for anybody in the room, specifically today, I want to pray one more prayer and then I'll close. That feels like, if you were honest with yourself, that you are not letting God lead your life today. That you are not letting him lead. Jesus is not in the driver's seat of your life. If you are honest with yourself, you would say he is not leading. Maybe you knew him in the past and you had a relationship with him in the past and you don't today. It's not right. Or you never have and you want to today. We're going to pray a really simple prayer and commit our lives to Jesus in a new way. If that's you and you want to let God lead today, could you just lift your hand up all across the room? Thank you. Awesome. There's hands going up all over. Thank you. Awesome. If that's you, and you want to let God lead, just put your hand up, put it right back down again. I'm not going to make you do anything. Awesome. We're going to just pray this simple prayer, everybody in the room together. One more second. Awesome. You can put your hands down. Thanks, guys. Awesome. Everybody in the room, let's say, Jesus, I need you. I know I haven't done everything right, and I ask you to forgive me. In today, I let you lead. I make you the leader of my life. In Jesus' name, amen.
Can we celebrate with those that just prayed that prayer for the first time, or maybe the first time in a long time? It's an exciting day in City Church when everyone takes their next step in their spiritual journey, and a great next step is going to Grow Track. If you're ready to make a difference, or if you're saying you heard Gabe's message today, which was so good, Gabe. Thank you for all of that. And you're saying, hey, I'm not disqualified. I better get going. I better make a difference and know God a little bit deeper. Come to Grow Track with us. Grow Track was happening right now during this service. It happens right down the hall. And you can come next week. Every single Sunday, Grow Track will happen at 10:15 in room 102. And you can just walk down the hall and you can join class next week. You could also get out your phone again and text Grow Track to 97,000. They'll put you on the list and get you connected and get you ready for the next class. Also, you can go, don't forget, you can go to the tent and you can get a gift if you're new here, and they can sign you up for Grow Track out there as well. Can you all please stand with me as we close?